Having a good system in place for your Rails app to get up and running can make it a lot easier to get going. So there's a few things that are built in and a few things that we can add to a Rails application to just basically make onboarding new people or switching to a new computer just be a lot easier. So looking at a project that I've got, a side project, this here has a few things that are kind of built in. So we're using the inside of the bin directory. You're going to be getting set up as a thing that's kind of built in. And this is a good place to start. So here we're going to make sure that we're installing all the gems. This is using Yarn for new JavaScript dependencies. We set up the database, clear out all the files, and then reboot the server if it was already running. So this basically gets things set up. This is a great place to start customizing. So if there's other things that you need to connect and hook up and make sure they're there, that's a great place to put it. The next step is seeds. I'm going to uncomment this. So with your seeds, your seeds file is basically things that your system depends on. So this would be system configuration and data that's just kind of universally needed. So this is stuff that you'd want to exist in production, in development, and in testing. So the example that we have here is we've got a list of countries, or something that's more appropriate. This is the budgeting app, so it's going to have some default categories for budgeting things. So the thing is that you want to have this in all environments, but it's not going to be any. You don't want to put stuff in here that's going to be, for example, development specific. So we wouldn't want to put in a test admin user. One of the things to remember when we're doing this kind of seeding type stuff, we want to make sure that we're using the find or create by typically. What this is going to do is let's see if I can say it right. I always stumble over the word. But there's the idempotency of this, which basically means we can run the seeds again and again and again, and it's not going to break anything. So if we did something where we said country.create country, then we would end up having 15 Canadas and 15 USs after we ran it a few times. So that's going to be a problem. Find or create is going to do a find. If it finds something, it will return it. If it doesn't find something, it will let us run, it will create it, and then it will let us optionally do a callback, run a block on it. So we could throw on here a do country and then something, but we don't need to in this case. So you want to make sure you're using the find or create by. One thing to note, I initially, way back in the day, did first or create, which is a big no-no. What this is going to do is it's actually going to ignore the where clause that you're doing here, and it's going to grab the first one. And if the first doesn't exist, then the thing you create will have that where clause applied to it. So that's not what we're typically going to be looking for. This actually is in classes that I have in here, the default category of the country, so I'm going to comment that out that we can just move on. So that's looking at the db seeds.rb file. The next, and this is probably where we're going to spend a little bit more time digging in, is the prime.rake, and this is what I typically will have set up. So this would be in your lib tasks prime.rake in this case. So what this is this is the kind of development environment seed file, basically. So in here, for this system, we're creating an admin user. So we're going to find or create by it, and we're going to use password. I also spit that out. That way, if you run this, it's going to say that you created it. I also typically would have a few other normal users. That way you can jump around between accounts. So with this, we have an admin organization. We create the membership for that organization. We could create 2 budgets. And then for each one of those budgets, I'm going to be setting up some test information. So they get a checking credit card account, which is for spending, and they have a savings, which is a savings account. This is doing envelope style budgeting. So with this, we create basically a set of default envelopes. In here, I make up a few names for payees and some dates. And in here, I basically create a bunch of random transactions. Now, for a lot of these, I'm doing find or create by, as I already said. That way, they're kind of unique. The transactions are all random, so I actually don't want to keep track of them or anything. So that's why in here, I'm just saying spit out 20 of them. Now, I am doing, instead of doing a like 20 dot times, I am doing create them until you run up to 20. And that's so that if I did 20 times and I ran 2 or 3 or 4 times, I'm going to create it every single time. So in here, I'm actually going to run it, and I'm only going to do it if, and actually I'm noticing I should probably be bumping this up to the top. So if it has more than 20, we're going to loop through and do it until we have 20. And here I'm doing everything random. So I'm putting into I'm looping through the 2 buckets. So I'm putting on the bucket, I'm putting onto the same membership. The payee, I'm just pulling from one of the random ones here. So I'm just taking a sample, and I'm doing the dates. I'm doing a sample from that as well. And a transaction is made up of multiple splits. So in here, I'm doing a spending one. So it's going to be negative 150 to $0. And that's going to be going into a random one of the envelopes and a random one of the bank accounts. So this lets me basically set up the entire database and get it up and running. Built into Rails is the bin/dev, and this I typically would recommend doing any preparatory stuff for running your system. And its focus primarily is looking at this proc file. So because of the way I have this set up, I'm using Yarn and the JS bundling and CSS bundling. So in here, it's going to run those 2 processes. It's going to run the web process as well. This is where we can also throw in anything else that we need to, Sidekick or whatnot. So this is a good place where we'd override that. So to use this, if I come in here and I go, if I go rake db drop, so we'll completely drop the database. I can now kind of run through these. So I can go bin setup, Rails, db seed, Rails dev prime, and that's not going to work. And bin dev. And if I refresh the page, I'm at the sign in. If I do admin@example.com with password, assuming I can spell, I'm now signed in. If I hop over to the transactions, I can see that there's a bunch of transactions in there that put into a bunch of random categories, and I got no groceries, which is interesting. But anyways, you can see how that kind of looks. And we have our whole system set up. Now, one thing that I like to do, kind of following along with this trend of the bin setup, bin dev, is I do bin prime. So with that, if I drop it again, so I've got a bin prime, and this is just going to do bin setup, db seed, dev prime, and the bin dev. So this basically does that whole process. And we're back to the blank system. And that's up and running. So having this, and then all the kind of the naming conventions on this comes from some of the articles by Thoughtbot, but this basically means that you can get people on board up and running right away. And if there are standard issues that people run into, you can easily put in something that either checks for the condition and gives a nice good error warning message, or maybe even corrects the issue automatically so they don't have to run into it. So using something like this helps simplify your onboarding, makes you more consistent, and makes everything run a lot better, and is a good way to get your project up and running well. All right, take care and see you next time.